Why you'd regret being a 17th century surgeon. Before we begin, what hour is it for you? Midnight? 3 a.m? Let me know in the comments, because I promise, you're not alone. You arrive at the surgeon's shop expecting at least a hint of dignity, a plaque, maybe, a cot with a clean sheet, perhaps a mentor in a long coat who says things like scalpel or trust your instincts. Instead, the first thing that greets you is the smell. It's a thick wall of rot and iron, like someone boiled spoiled meat in vinegar and despair. The second thing that greets you is a scream from the back room that abruptly cuts off. You don't ask questions. That's rule 1, apparently. You are now a 17th century barber surgeon, which sounds fancy but mostly means you are part-time hairstylist, part-time dentist, and full-time hazard to the human body. Your training consists of watching one guy lose 3 fingers to an infected boil and being told, "Don't do that." That's the whole curriculum. Your tools are a saw, some forceps, a hook, and something called a probe, which is essentially a sharp stick that you jab into people to see what happens. All kept in a leather roll that hasn't been cleaned since the 30 Years' War. Sterilization, not invented yet. Antiseptic, no clue. Anesthesia, that's a prayer and a bottle of gin. You reach for a rag to wipe your hands and realize it's just last week's shirt someone left behind after vomiting on it. So you wipe your hands on your own coat, which was white once. Now it's the color of regret. Your first patient is a dock worker with a leg that looks like a ham left out in the sun for a week. He limps in supported by 2 friends and says, "It don't feel right." You nod seriously, like you have any idea what's going on, and mutter, "Let's have a look." Under his trousers, the leg is greenish with black veins spidering out and pus leaking from something that used to be a knee. This is what gangrene looks like, you think, or maybe a curse. Either way, the only treatment you know is remove the bad part and hope they don't scream too much. You prepare your instruments. The saw is blunt. The knife is more of a suggestion. There's no surgical bed, so you ask his friends to hold him down on a table that once served cheese at a wedding. You bite your lip. You want to say something reassuring, something like, "You're in good hands," but he's not. Instead, you swig gin, for you, not him, and say, "Bite this," handing him a strip of leather. He looks terrified. You look worse. The first cut is the worst, not for him, for you. The skin resists, the blood sprays, the smell intensifies. He thrashes. His friends can't hold him. You yell. He screams. The knife slips. You pretend it didn't. You saw through the bone like you're cutting firewood, except the wood is bleeding and calling out for its mother. The saw jams halfway. You curse. He convulses. You try again, and then a wet pop. It's done. The leg drops to the floor with a meaty thunk. You stare at it. It stares back somehow. You press a hot iron to the stump to cauterize it. The scent of burning flesh is something you'll never forget. It's sweet and horrible, like barbecuing your sins. The man passes out, probably for the best. You wrap the stump in linen that used to be part of a curtain. His friends carry him out like a sack of ruined potatoes. No one thanks you. There is no applause, just a puddle of blood soaking into the floorboards and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll do this again, probably worse. You clean your tools by wiping them on the edge of the table. That's standard protocol. You step outside for air and realize the town's cats have gathered. They smell opportunity. You sit on a barrel, hands shaking, wondering how this became your life. You were supposed to be respected. Respected men don't have to dig bone fragments out of their sleeves. A man walks by, points at the blood on your apron and says, "Busy morning?" You nod and say, "Just got started." He laughs. You don't, because you're realizing something crucial. This isn't medicine. This is butchery with extra paperwork. And the worst part, you're the most qualified person for miles. You go home, or rather, to the back corner of the workshop, which counts as your lodgings now. It's a mattress made of straw, mites, and despair. You lie awake as the rats hold foot races above your head. The smell of gangrene clings to your hair. You consider shaving it all off, but remember, you're also the local barber. That's your Tuesday job. By dawn, there's a line of the doomed outside your door. Someone heard you lopped off a leg without the patient dying on the spot. That makes you a miracle worker, apparently. First up is a man with a toothache. He swears the pain is driving him to madness. He's not exaggerating. He's already gnawed a chunk out of his sleeve and keeps muttering to his elbow. You nod wisely and fetch the dental tools, a rusty hook, a bent spoon, and a pair of pliers that once belonged to your grandfather. You sterilize them the traditional way, wipe them on your apron and shout, "Hold still." The man holds a candle in one hand and your sleeve in the other. You get a knee on his chest for leverage and start pulling. The tooth does not cooperate. It has roots like an old oak tree and a personal vendetta against your self-esteem. After 3 attempts, a chunk of enamel shoots across the room. He shrieks. You announce, "Success!" and shove a wad of linen into his mouth before he can correct you. Next comes a child with a broken arm. You try to remember what bones are supposed to feel like. All you know is this one is not. You attempt to set it straight with 2 sticks and some twine. The child passes out. You decide that's a win. You move on to a noblewoman with melancholia, which in medical terms means she's bored, rich, and possibly just hates her husband. She demands leeches. You oblige because leeches don't scream. You grab a jar and let the little guys do their thing while she drinks herbal wine and reads psalms. She calls you a genius. You call her the easiest patient of the week. Midday, a local priest brings you a man who fell off a roof and landed on something pointy. You don't ask what. He has a large gash along his ribs and keeps slipping into unconsciousness. You poke at the wound like it owes you money. He twitches. Good sign. You sew it up with needle and thread meant for upholstery. There's no time for delicate work. You don't even know how to make stitches neat. You just loop and pull like you're mending a coat. When you finish, it looks like the man was attacked by a drunk spider with commitment issues. Later, a woman begs you to treat her husband's cursed foot. Turns out it's just athlete's foot, but you can't tell her that because you don't know what that is. So you burn some rosemary, chant something vaguely Latin, and rub vinegar on it. She calls it divine healing. You call it guessing with confidence. By sunset, your hands are sore, your apron is indistinguishable from raw meat, and your patience is on life support. You sit down to eat, stale bread, a wedge of cheese that might be older than you, and ale that tastes like betrayal. You eat it anyway. It's the closest thing to comfort you get these days. You stare at the wall where someone has scratched a crude tally of how many surgeries they've survived. 17 marks, a few names, a skull doodle. You hear another scream from outside, urgent, panicked. You sigh, grab your tools, and go. Another broken limb, another infected wound, another chance to be a hero with absolutely no training and a toolkit that should be legally classified as medieval torture. And yet, somehow, you're better than nothing. That's the terrifying part. People trust you. You, the man with no medical license, no real knowledge, and a growing suspicion that half your patients will haunt you from beyond the grave. But you keep going, because there's always another cry, another knock, another poor soul who'd rather risk your rusty saw than face nature on its own terms. You lay your tools down, wipe your brow, and roll up your sleeves again. Tomorrow, you'll do it all over, unless someone decides you're a fraud and tosses you in the river. Either way, you'll sleep in your clothes. Partly because you're exhausted, and partly because you're not sure they'd survive being taken off. Welcome to the bloody trade. Your surgical toolkit arrives in a box that looks like it was last opened during a plague. Not the most recent plague, the one before that. It creaks open to reveal the instruments of your new trade. A saw with teeth like a drunken bear, a knife that's more butter than blade, a pair of forceps that might also be tongs, and a probing iron shaped like it lost a duel with a blacksmith. Each piece is lovingly stained with the patina of poor decisions. The saw, your most used and most feared instrument, has a handle that's been smoothed by decades of nervous palms. It's heavy, unforgiving, and prone to snag. When you first pick it up, it weeps a small flake of rust onto your boot like it's trying to warn you. The scalpel, if we're being generous with terms, is about as sharp as a spoon and twice as wobbly. It doesn't slice so much as pressure its way through tissue. You test it on a bit of pig hide. The pig would not have survived. You pretend not to notice. The bone forceps squeak when you squeeze them. They do not align. They were probably made by someone who hated bones, or perhaps humanity in general. You attempt to pick up a pebble with them. You succeed, on the fourth try, and immediately drop it when the hinge gives out with a sigh. There's also a long, narrow rod referred to in the guild ledger as a probing iron. Its exact purpose is unknown to you, but you have theories. None of them are comforting. Then there's the bowl, just a plain metal bowl. You don't know what it's for. Blood? Pus? Tears? You assume yes to all. You consider asking your mentor, but he's currently passed out in the corner with a bottle of gin and a nosebleed. Probably self-induced. You set the tools on your workspace, which is just a wooden table with suspicious stains and one leg that doesn't quite reach the floor. Every time you touch it, it wobbles like it's trying to escape the responsibility. Sterilization, you're told, is a luxury. Heat makes the metal brittle, says the apprentice next to you, who has 3 fingers and a cough. He uses the same rag to clean tools, wipe his forehead, and polish apples. You ask if vinegar might help. He laughs for a full minute and then says, "What are you, a wizard?" Your apron has not been washed since you received it. It smells like regret, sour fat, and despair. There are bloodstains in multiple shades, some brown, some nearly black, and a few greenish smears that you refuse to identify. You hang it on a hook at night, but somehow it's always damp in the morning. You've started to believe it has its own circulatory system. The room you work in is half windowless and half open to rats. It has 1 shelf, 2 stools, and the overwhelming feeling that no one is coming to save you. A jar of leeches watches you from a shadowy corner. You think one winked. Your first solo assignment is to extract a shard of metal from a man's shoulder. He says he fell from a cart. Judging by the size and angle of the wound, the cart was moving at speed, on fire, and driven by Satan. You open your kit and immediately realize 2 things. 1, you don't have anything small enough to grab the shard without digging a canyon around it, and 2, the man has already started screaming. You haven't even touched him. You take that as emotional foresight. You pick the poking iron and decide to use it as a probe. It slides in with all the grace of a crowbar. The man passes out. You take this as mercy. You wiggle it gently, which in your case means accidentally, and hear a wet click. The metal shard pops out with a squelch and lands in your bloody bowl. You fish it out and present it like a trophy. The man remains unconscious. You decide to suture the wound. Unfortunately, you've only practiced stitching on oranges. This man is not an orange. You learn this the hard way. The finished stitch resembles a drunken spider trying to spell its name during an earthquake. You wrap it with cloth soaked in something labelled ointment. It smells like turpentine and regret. You apply it anyway. By the end of the day, your tools are even dirtier, your apron is 1 layer closer to sentience, and your self-esteem is lying face down in a gutter. You clean your instruments with the same water you use to wash your hands. It turns a murky red. You shrug. It'll do. You sit down, exhausted. Your mentor awakens long enough to glance at your handiwork and say, "Could have been worse. Could have been internal." You're not sure what that means. You're afraid to ask. The tools go back in the box. You lock it, not for safety, but because you don't trust them not to crawl out at night and finish what you started. Tomorrow, someone's losing a limb. You can feel it in your bones, and probably in theirs too. By day 3, you've named your tools. The saw is now Betsy. The scalpel is Whisper. The forceps, Lefty and Traitor, depending on how cooperative they are. It's not for sentimentality, it's for psychological survival. When you're elbow deep in someone's abdomen with nothing but Betsy and blind hope, it helps to pretend you're not the worst qualified person in the room. Even if you are, especially if you are. Today's patient is a sailor with a shattered femur. He was dropped off by his crewmates with a hearty, "He's all yours," and a bottle of rum. You were hoping for a paper cut. Instead, you get a leg that looks like someone tried to fold it into a swan. Amputation is your only option. You know this because the bone is sticking out and the patient is screaming something about mercy and please stop sharpening tools in front of me. You give him a rag to bite, then you take it back because you need it to wipe your hands. He faints. Good, that'll save on rum. You get Betsy ready. She's not sharp, but she's consistent. You brace the leg. You start sawing. It takes longer than you'd like. Midway through, you pause to mop your brow and offer a philosophical apology to the universe. The leg makes a sound like snapping celery. You try not to gag. A crowd gathers, not to help, just to watch. One of them eats a boiled egg while you slice through sinew. You vow to haunt him after death. The leg finally separates. You lift it victoriously like a barbaric trophy. Someone claps. You're not sure if it's sarcastic. You drop the leg into the pile. That's right. There's a pile now. No one talks about the pile. Suturing the stump is tricky. You use catgut thread and prayer. The result is less medical miracle and more meat knapsack. But the bleeding stops, so technically it's a success. The sailor wakes up and screams. You hand him the rum. He drinks. A lot. You consider joining him. After he's carried away, you clean your tools with the same cloth you've used all week. It now resembles a crime scene and smells like wet dog trapped in a chimney. You dunk the instruments in warm water. The rust sizzles. You assume that's fine. You're asked to tend to a nobleman's hemorrhoids next. You contemplate running. You don't. You're paid in coin, and that coin buys gin. You accept your fate. The examination takes place in a candlelit room filled with too many curtains. The noble disrobes with theatrical flair. You try not to make eye contact with anything. The procedure involves a hot poker, a prayer, and your dignity slowly dissolving like sugar in rain. You finish without fainting. Barely. The noble declares it a success and gives you a bonus. You're not proud of what you've done, but you're also not hungry anymore. So there's that. Back in the surgery room, you find the apprentice trying to extract a tooth using a hammer and moral support. The patient is weeping. The apprentice offers to cauterize the socket with a lantern. You intervene. You pull the tooth with forceps and a grunt that echoes through your spine. The tooth pops out, and so does some blood. And a scream. Yours. You wash the forceps in the bowl. You think about how many mouths, wounds, and possibly animal carcasses they've touched. You rinse again. You feel no better. Later that evening, a local widow comes in with a lump. She shows you. It's not a lump. It's a second opinion. You nod solemnly. You don't know what it is, but you wrap it and advise fasting. That seems safe. You realize no one here knows what they're doing, including you, especially you. And yet somehow, you are the most trusted person within 5 miles to cut into flesh and call it treatment. You light a candle. You stare at your tools. They stare back. The saw gleams. The scalpel twitches in the draft. The forceps creak softly. You hang your apron by the door. It swings slightly. Still damp. Still ominous. Outside, someone is shouting about a boil the size of a grapefruit. Inside, the rats are chewing on your unused bandages. You think one of them is sick. You might have to operate. You pour yourself a cup of something fermented and question all your life choices. Again, you survive another day, just barely. And tomorrow? Tomorrow's probably going to involve pus. A lot of it, you wake up to banging on the door. It's not the gentle, hello, I need assistance kind of banging. It's the, someone's about to die and you're the only lunatic with a bone saw kind. You lurch out of bed, half dressed, half sane, and completely unprepared. Waiting outside is a burly man carrying another man like a sack of flour. The flour sack man is screaming, loudly. His leg is bent in a way that suggests God has left the building. There's blood. So much blood. You can't tell if it's his or yours or from something you stepped in on the way over. The burly one drops him on your operating table with a thud, shrugs, and says, "He fell off the roof. Legs gone funny." You nod, like this is a normal sentence. It's not. You ask if he's had anything for the pain. "Gin," says the burly one. You ask how much. He gestures to an empty bottle. So, not enough. You glance at the patient's leg. It's already blackening, smells like spoiled stew. You don't have time to debate. The leg has to go. You wash your hands, sort of. A quick splash in the water basin and a wipe on your apron, which already looks like someone murdered a pig on it. You set out your tools, saw, clamp, forceps, a cloth to bite on, and a bowl for whatever happens. Then you realize you've never actually done this before. You've watched it. Once. From a distance. While hiding behind a curtain and eating a stale biscuit. But now, it's just you, the screaming man, and Betsy, your slightly rusted, emotionally unreliable bone saw. You give the patient the cloth to bite. He spits it out and screams some more. You give him the rest of the gin. He drinks, not fast enough. 2 men hold him down. You say something reassuring like, "This will be over quickly," which is a lie. Then you place the saw against his thigh, take a deep breath, and start sawing. The sound is indescribable. Flesh gives way with a sickening ease. Bone is another matter. It grinds, it shrieks, it fights you. Your arms burn, your eyes water, your soul begs for forgiveness. The patient is howling, biting into one of the assistants now. Blood is everywhere, on your apron, your face, your shoes, your dignity. Midway through, a chunk of something wet hits you in the lip. You don't cry, you don't vomit, you simply disassociate, you finish the cut. The leg comes free with a squelch that echoes through the room. The patient passes out, either from pain, blood loss, or divine mercy. You don't know, you don't ask. Now the real challenge, stopping the bleeding. You clamp, you press, you pray. Someone hands you a hot iron. You hesitate for only a second before branding the stump like it's livestock. The smell of burning flesh fills the room. It will haunt your dreams. You bandage the wound. It looks like a pillow fight gone wrong, but the bleeding stops. You did it. You just amputated a leg. You sit down. You shake. You realize you're covered in blood, sweat, and possibly urine. Again, not all of it yours. The assistants pat you on the back like you've just won a bar fight. One of them calls you Doc. You nearly laugh yourself into unconsciousness. Outside, the town bell rings. Another patient is coming. Word spreads fast when you don't kill someone immediately. You wipe off your saw, rinse your hands, and prepare for round 2. You're officially a surgeon now. Lucky you, you don't get a break. There are no lunch hours in 17th century medicine, mostly because the moment you look at food, someone walks in leaking from a place that should never leak. Today's second patient is an apprentice blacksmith who decided that hammering molten iron near his own thigh was a good idea. He's carried in by 2 men who look more distressed than he does. That's never a good sign. You motion to your table, the one still stained from earlier, and begin the ritual of pretending you know what you're doing. The leg is burned, badly. The skin is black and curling, like overcooked pork. You prod gently. The man doesn't scream, which means the nerves are dead. This is either good or horrifying. You try not to think about it. He looks up at you with one eye half closed and says, "You're not the barber I remember." You nod solemnly. He died. Not technically true, but the last one moved to plague work. You suspect he preferred the company of rats. You grab a bowl of vinegar and splash it on the wound. He screams. Apparently, some nerves are still clinging to their jobs. That's unfortunate. While he thrashes, you look over at your tools. The saw's still wet from the last leg. The knife is slightly bent. The clamp is rusting in real time. It's like hosting a dinner party and realizing all your silverware has been cursed. You contemplate removing the leg, but you've already done one today and your arms feel like noodles soaked in regret. So instead, you decide to cut away the dead flesh, a process called debridement, which sounds clinical but really just means cut off the black bits and hope for the best. You begin slicing. The smell hits first, burnt meat and pus, the kind of scent that makes your ancestors wince in their graves. You try mouth breathing. It's worse. You taste it now. The man's eyes roll back, but he's still awake. You offer him the empty gin bottle which he sucks on like a baby bird. You mutter soothing things like, "almost done," and "it could be worse." Neither are true. When you finish, the leg looks less like a leg and more like a cursed yam. You wrap it in cloth and say a prayer, not for healing, but for the patient's sense of smell. Then you turn around and discover another man waiting. You didn't hear him come in, that's suspicious. He's thin, pale, wearing a velvet coat and a powdered wig. He looks like he's auditioning to die of syphilis. He has a cough that sounds like crumpled parchment and the kind of smile that says, "I will not survive Act 2. He sits down and removes his boot. His foot is swollen and weeping. You flinch. He says it's been like that for a few weeks. You ask why he waited. He says, "I thought it would get better." You want to scream. Instead, you nod. Then you poke his foot and pus shoots out like a party favour. You duck. It hits the wall. He laughs. You hate him immediately. He says he was bitten by something. A rat, maybe. Possibly a wife. The bite is festering. The skin around it is the colour of spoiled milk. You suggest amputation. He declines. You mention gangrene. He nods politely. You realize he doesn't care if he dies. He just doesn't want to be impolite. So you do what you can. You drain the foot. You pack it with herbs. You wrap it tight. Then you tell him to drink water, avoid sugar, and pray. He thanks you. You watch him limp away and mentally start planning your apology letter to his future ghost. The sun is going down now. Your apron could walk on its own. Your hands shake every time you lift a tool. The table is stained with blood, bile, and something green you never identified. You wipe it all down with vinegar, which does nothing but insult the bacteria. You pour a little on your own hands. It stings. It always stings. You sit down at last. The chair creaks. Your back protests. You take out a notebook and write, "Amputation number 1, not the worst thing ever. Debridement number 1, smells like guilt. Drainage number 1, pray harder." You close the book and look out the window. Smoke drifts from chimneys. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, someone is definitely catching plague. You'll see them tomorrow. But for now, you rest. Because you know this isn't over. It's never over. There are always more limbs, always more screams, always more chances to screw it up. Welcome to medicine. South, you've met your tools, you've amputated a leg, you've bathed in more bodily fluids than a chamber pot in a bumpy carriage. And now, it's time to learn what truly defines you as a 17th century surgeon. Your mastery of the leech. Not knowledge, not technique. Certainly not hygiene. No, your status now hinges entirely on your ability to keep a jar of slimy bloodsuckers alive and vaguely cooperative. Your mentor, if we can call the man with the eye twitch and the collection of preserved gallstones a mentor, hands you a cloudy glass jar and says, "They're moody today. Don't make it worse." Inside the jar are 6 leeches, swaying gently in a soup of what you pray is just pond water. You can't tell if they're moving because they're alive or because the water itself has become sentient and deeply upset. "Which one do I use?" you ask. He shrugs. "The hungriest. You'll know." You will not know. But you nod anyway and head toward your next patient, a baker's apprentice with a nose the size of a goose egg and a fever so high he started speaking in rhyme. His pulse is rapid. His eyes twitch. According to your mentor, this can only mean one thing: too much blood. Yes, that's right. The human body, that squishy miracle of divine design, is constantly on the verge of overflowing with vital fluids. The solution? Drain it, preferably with the help of nature's little vampires. You open the leech jar and try not to gag. The stench is indescribable, a cocktail of fish tank, expired soup, and whatever moral rot lies at the heart of 17th century medicine. You reach in with shaky fingers and pluck out a particularly plump specimen. It promptly slips from your grasp and lands on your boot with an audible splat. The patient watches, horrified. You assure him this is part of the process. You say it with the confidence of someone who has never done this before and hopes no one notices. You grab another leech. This one sticks to your thumb and begins to wiggle with unsettling enthusiasm. You carefully place it on the boy's neck. It doesn't bite. You nudge it. It slides off. You whisper to it. It stares at you. You think, "Maybe he's too hot," your mentor offers helpfully. They prefer lukewarm victims. You consider putting the boy in the river for a moment. Instead, you dab the area with tepid water and try again. This time the leech latches on, and the boy lets out a yelp. "Good," your mentor says. That's the sound of balance being restored. You stare at the steadily growing blob on the boy's neck. It pulses as it drinks. So do you. But that's just your heart trying to crawl out of your chest. Soon, you're rotating between jars. One for fevers, one for melancholia, one for unruly wives, which you pretend not to hear. There's a whole caste system among leech users, you learn. A subtle hierarchy of bloodletting prestige. Did you use the river swamp variety, or the imported Hungarian breed, raised exclusively on monk blood and aristocratic ankles? Your mentor boasts of a leech that once cured a bishop's gout and was rewarded with a name and its own linen wrap. You begin to suspect he's making it up, but then again, you're the one holding a jar of worms and calling it medicine. Your third patient is a seamstress who's been coughing blood for 2 weeks. She lies on the table like wet laundry, wheezing. You suggest leeches. She blinks. You explain the method. She continues blinking. You point to the jar. She tries to sit up. You push her gently back down. Don't worry, you say. It's better than bleeding you with a knife. Your mentor grins and adds, not by much. You apply 2 leeches to her chest and 1 behind her ear. The one on her chest falls asleep midway. You nudge it. It burps. You are horrified. She starts to look paler. You try to convince yourself this is progress. Your mentor claps you on the shoulder and says, there, now she'll be right as rain. You glance at the leech, now the size of your thumb and drooping like a drunk. You're not so sure. You're learning the lingo now. Humours, bile, choleric imbalance. These are the words that make you sound like a man of science, when really you're just guessing with conviction. You are not a healer. You are a ritual performer in a theatre of suffering. The day ends with a leech escaping. It's found in the privy 2 hours later, clinging to the rim like it owns the place. You name it Sir Reginald out of spite. That night, you wash your hands in a bowl of vinegar and wonder how much blood is too much to lose before a patient starts seeing angels. You flip through your notes. Patient number 1, fever, leeches X2, still hot. Patient number 2, cough, leeches X3, now pale, breathing, quieter. Patient number 3, gout, leeches X1, screamed, then fell asleep. Possible success. You close the journal. Somewhere behind the walls, a leech slithers across the floor in search of another ankle. You light a candle and pray it's not yours. You wake up to find a leech in your boot. This is now normal. At some point, you stopped screaming and started accepting. Just as you've accepted the fact that your fingernails are permanently stained red, your apron now smells like fermented despair, and the neighbour's dog won't stop barking at you because it thinks you're a walking wound. Congratulations, you've leveled up in the surgeon hierarchy. You're now the proud owner of a fine nose for leeches, a title bestowed by your mentor after you correctly identified a leech that wasn't hungry because it had already fed on the assistant's thumb. But with prestige comes responsibility. Specifically, you've been tasked with acquiring more leeches. The supply is low, your mentor says, puffing on a pipe made from bone and denial. And the apothecary's charging double since the bishop's bloodletting festival last month. You did not mishear that. You are now sent to the leech market. Yes, that exists. It's dusk. You arrive at a muddy square packed with jars, buckets, and people who have clearly given up on eye contact. A man with no teeth offers you the lively kind from a sack that moves on its own. Another vendor boasts about his noble leeches, each supposedly fed on minor aristocracy. One leech has a velvet ribbon tied around it. You pretend not to see. You find a seller with a reputable hunch and an honest stink. He nods solemnly and produces a wooden box from under his cloak. Inside, 8 wriggling, shiny specimens that look like very determined slugs. Hungarian, he says. Fresh. Prefer ankles. You nod, as if you understand what makes Hungarian leeches superior. You haggle. You lose. You hand over more coins than your monthly pay and carry your prize back like it's the crown jewels. Your mentor inspects them with exaggerated ceremony. Fine weight, he mutters, holding one up to the light like a jeweller evaluating a cursed gem. Suction looks promising. The next morning, you put them to work. Your patient is a merchant who smells like goose fat and self-importance. He complains of excess pressure in the skull, a medical term that means drank too much wine while yelling at his servants. Your mentor recommends leeches to draw off the brain vapours. You smile, nod, and proceed to affix 2 leeches to the man's temples. He protests. Won't this ruin my hat line? You assure him it's temporary. You are lying. The leeches latch on, their little mouths puckering like judgmental aunties. The merchant makes a noise like a chicken being insulted. He survives, unfortunately. Later that week, word spreads that you've got a good hand with the suckers. Local nobles begin sending requests. Some arrive in carriages, some send letters sealed with wax and desperation. One even sends a footman with a pre-drawn diagram of preferred bite zones. You try to feel proud, you fail. You've also started noticing something strange. The leeches, they're disappearing. You suspect theft. Maybe from the assistant, maybe from the night porter, maybe from the leeches themselves. At this point, You wouldn't be surprised if one of them was selling the others in back alleys for drops of sailor blood and fermented toad. So you set a trap. You leave a jar in plain sight, half covered with a damp rag. You wait. At midnight, you hear it. The creak of the door, the hush of movement, and then a rat dragging a leech. They're working together. You blink 3 times and promise yourself it's the vinegar fumes. You go back to bed. The next day, you're summoned to the mayor's house. His son has the shaking illness, which you later identify as a combination of poor parenting, untreated fever, and maybe just being 10 years old. Nevertheless, the mayor demands the finest bloodletting your worms can provide. You bring your best leech, the one you've secretly named Sir Chompsalot. He's long, glossy, and terrifyingly eager. You apply him to the boy's leg and step back. The mayor peers at the feeding creature and murmurs, "Medicine truly is an art." You don't respond. You're too busy wondering if Sir Chompsalot is growing a second head. That's probably fine. Afterward, the mayor tips you with a cured ham and 3 buttons. "For your trouble," he says. You now own more buttons than clean undergarments. By week's end, your hands tremble when you see jars. You start hearing phantom slurps. You swear one leech winked at you. You begin to question everything: your career, your sanity, your hygiene habits. You write in your medical journal, Day 14, applied 6 leeches today. 4 performed admirably, 1 vomited, 1 tried to crawl into the patient's ear. Recommend rotating jars more frequently. Also recommend therapy, which does not yet exist. You close the book. You light a candle. Somewhere in the dark, a jar tips over. You consider screaming. Instead, you whisper, "Sir Reginald, is that you?" It's 9 a.m. and you're already sweating through your second apron. Not because it's hot, though it is, unbearably so, but because today you're performing surgery in front of an audience. Yes, an audience. They're calling it a demonstration, as if you're unveiling a new line of fashionable neckwear and not about to hack a man's leg off with a dull saw in front of 30 gawking aristocrats and 2 fainting maidens. You glance around the operating room, or rather, the theatre, because that's what they're calling it now. It even has bleachers, wooden ones, lined with people holding handkerchiefs to their noses and expressions ranging from morbid curiosity to visible hunger. Some brought snacks, some brought children. One man is sketching with great enthusiasm. The patient, meanwhile, is already unconscious. Thank the gin gods. You prepped him with a generous pint of alcohol and a good whack to the head. He's a blacksmith with gangrene in his foot, which now resembles something between boiled ham and witchcraft. The choice was amputation or death. He wisely chose you. Well, wisely is a stretch. A bell rings. That's your cue. Your assistant tightens the straps. The patient's arms are tied down, his leg exposed, the toes already a shade of despairing purple. You step forward, saw in hand. It's a fine instrument, by 17th century standards, which is to say, it's sharpish, vaguely clean, and makes a sound when you wave it that immediately silences the crowd. You clear your throat and begin. Ladies and gentlemen, the affliction before you is known as mortification of the lower limb. Our subject... Is he breathing? A voice calls from the stands. Yes, you snap. For now. Someone chuckles. It might have been you. You continue. The only treatment for such rot is amputation, quick, efficient, and blessed by science. You hold up your saw like it's a sacred relic. It gleams. Someone faints. Time to work. You start with the skin. The blade doesn't so much cut as it does complain. It drags through flesh with the sound of old rope tearing. The audience leans in. One woman bites her glove. You reach the muscle layer. Blood sprays. You feel it hit your cheek. You do not flinch. You are, after all, a professional. Your assistant hands you a clamp, or tries to. He drops it. It bounces off the floor with a clatter that echoes through the room like a cannon misfire. You glare. He mouths, "Sorry." You consider sawing him next. Back to the patient. You brace the leg. Saw meets bone. This part always takes longer than you think it should. You press harder. The crowd is deathly silent now. Even the sketch artist has stopped mid-ink stroke. The bone cracks. The saw jerks. You nearly lose grip. And then, freedom. The foot comes loose with a final pop that sounds like someone uncorking a bottle of terrible decisions. There's a beat of silence, then applause, real applause. You look up, momentarily stunned. The crowd claps like you've just recited poetry or painted a masterpiece. A few even stand. You bow. Because what else can you do? Your mentor, watching from the corner, nods approvingly. "Clean work," he murmurs. "Bit of flair at the end. I like that." You hold the severed foot like a trophy. The blacksmith is still unconscious. Thank all the spirits above. You place the foot gently into a metal basin. It lands with a squelch that, regrettably, also receives applause. Someone tosses you a handkerchief. You dab your face. You realize the blood on your cheek wasn't the patient's. It's yours. You cut your thumb on the saw during the bone bit. Classic. Later, while stitching the stump, you overhear your assistant whisper to a noblewoman, "He's one of the best in the city. Removed a leg in under 3 minutes." You didn't. It was closer to 5. But you say nothing. Let the myth grow. Outside the theatre, a carriage awaits to take the foot to the university. Yes, the university. Apparently, some scholars are studying decay rates of separated limbs. You suspect it's just another excuse to avoid real patients. By the end of the day, your hands are cramping, your back is on strike, and you smell like regret sautéed in iron. You soak your tools in wine, not for sterilization, but because you spilled the wine and have nothing else. You go home. You dream of applause, and feet, and applause for feet. You wake up screaming, "Welcome to the show. You're the star." And the horror is just beginning. You wake up the next morning with a splitting headache and a note nailed to your door. It reads, "Brilliant performance. I especially liked the part where the foot fell into the bowl. Truly visceral. Signed, Lord Pettersley, 3rd row, left side. P.S. Would love to commission a private demonstration. I have an elderly dachshund." You stare at the note for a long time, weighing your options. Consider flight. Consider crime. Settle for sighing and putting water on to boil. Another day in the bloody spotlight. Back at the operating theatre, the janitor is scrubbing dried blood off the viewing platform while humming a cheerful tune. You pass him with a nod. He gives you a thumbs up and says, "Good show yesterday." The scream echo was particularly memorable. You thank him. You think he's being genuine. You also think he might be unwell. Today's patient is already tied down when you arrive. You were told he's a chimney sweep with a shattered arm and a festering tendency. You translate that as probably full of pus and vengeance. He glares at you with one good eye. The other is swollen shut. You consider soothing words, but what's the point? He's seen the room. He knows where he is. He's already making peace with his gods. Or his rats. Possibly both. The audience is larger today. Word has spread. There's now a balcony section. Some have brought telescopes. One man is sketching you instead of the patient. Another is knitting and muttering something about tendon tension. There's even a guy selling hot chestnuts near the back. The bell rings. You're on. You step forward and introduce today's act. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another fine installment of Will He Survive? You gesture to the patient, who responds by groaning into his gag and trying to bite his own shoulder. Today's procedure is a simple arm amputation, a warm-up act really, but because yesterday's performance earned rave reviews, expectations are high. You begin cutting. The skin peels back with all the enthusiasm of a reluctant curtain. Blood starts immediately, not in a charming trickle, but in a torrent that slaps your apron like it owes money. The audience leans in. You keep your face neutral. You have learned to work while covered in viscera. It's a skill. It's also most of your resume. Your assistant, bless him, hands you tools in the correct order today. You make a mental note to not fire him, yet. Midway through the procedure, a nobleman in the front row raises his hand. You pause, puzzled. "Yes?" you ask, because why not? He adjusts his monocle and says, "Could you angle the arm slightly more left? My view of the tendon is obstructed." You nod. "Of course, my lord. Wouldn't want to ruin the composition." The patient screams as you reposition the limb. The audience claps. You wonder if you're the monster or if they are. maybe both. You reach the bone. It's cracked, but not cleanly. It's going to be a tough cut. You announce this fact to the crowd like a magician preparing for a difficult trick. Ladies and gentlemen, this may take some extra sawing. Someone yells, "Break a leg." You don't respond. You're trying not to cry. The bone resists. The saw screeches. You sweat. Your assistant winces. The crowd is absolutely enthralled. When the arm finally detaches with a jagged snap, someone actually throws flowers. You're too tired to dodge them. You catch them in your face. You raise the limb. "Success," you declare. The janitor faints. After the operation, you address questions from the audience. One woman wants to know if it's true the French use mustard poultices. A gentleman asks if you've ever tried reattaching anything just for fun. You reply with the dignity of a man who has been sneezed on by intestines. You end the show by bowing. They clap again. You leave the stage with blood up to your elbows and applause trailing behind you like perfume. You hate that you love it. Back in your quarters, you find 3 letters waiting. One is from a lord who wants you to amputate his nephew's offensive personality. It's phrased as a joke. You're 40% sure he's serious. The second is from a critic who calls your incisions lacking flair and your stitching rushed. He recommends a change in thread and more flourish when removing limbs. You fantasize about amputating his pen hand. The third is from your mother. She hopes you found honest work. You consider writing back, but how does one explain this? Later that evening, a messenger arrives with a covered tray. It's a gift from one of your fans. You lift the lid. It's a cake, shaped like a severed foot. You eat it with shaking hands. You lie awake in bed that night, haunted by the day's events. Not the screaming, not the gore, not even the idiot with the monocle. No, you're haunted by the realization that you might actually be getting good at this. And that tomorrow, they expect an encore. The gentle sound of bells tolling from the church tower. A peaceful morning in 17th century Europe, which can only mean one thing. The plague is back. Not a small outbreak either. No, this one's the full symphony. Swollen lymph nodes, coughing up blood, spontaneous corpse piles in the alley, the whole package. Your street smells like boiled rats and incense. The official response? Panic and prayer. The actual doctors, gone, disappeared like yesterday's decapitated patient, which leaves you. You, the barber surgeon with a tendency to faint at strong odours and a resume that includes once removed a tooth with a hammer. You, the man now holding a note from the city council that reads, "Congratulations, you've been promoted to plague duty." Enclosed, 1 beaked mask, 1 stick for prodding, and absolutely no instructions. You stare at the pile they left on your doorstep. The mask looks like a prop from a horror play. Long leather beak, glass eye holes, and the lingering scent of last season's death. The robe is stiff with wax and grime. The gloves are goat hide. The stick is... well, it's just a stick. But it's got character. You suit up like a morbid scarecrow. Every part of the costume squeaks, creaks, or smells like vinegar-soaked tragedy. You adjust the mask's strap and immediately regret it. The herbs stuffed in the beak, mint, rose petals, wormwood, do nothing to cover the stench of death. They just add notes. The first house you visit has an X painted on the door in tar. That's plague shorthand for don't knock unless you have divine immunity or a death wish. You knock anyway. A woman answers. Her skin is pale and shiny like wax fruit. Her eyes are half focused. "He's in the back," she says, before coughing directly onto your mask. You consider purifying yourself in fire. You walk through the cramped, damp hallway. Furniture is overturned. Candles burn low. The air is thick and warm, like soup made from despair. In the back room lies a man who was alive very recently. He is not anymore. You use the stick to confirm. Standard plague protocol. Poke, don't touch. You make a note on your scroll. Deceased. Odor. Aggressive. Buboes, yes. Spirit status, pending. You turn to leave, but she stops you. "Do something," she pleads. "Like what?" "You're the doctor." You glance at your plague stick, then at the pile of misery in the bed. You consider offering advice, but the only words that come to mind are good luck and run. Instead, you mutter something about rosewater and spiritual alignment. She nods like she understands. You nod like you didn't just make that up. Outside, a priest swings a censer full of incense while chanting. He eyes your mask and crosses himself twice. You give him a small wave. The mask squeaks. The next house is worse. This time the patient is still alive. Barely. A child, maybe 8, with sunken cheeks and black sores. His mother begs you to save him. You check your pouch. Inside, a dried rose petal, 2 cloves, and a note that says, "Do your best." You give him the clove, not because it will help, but because it's all you have. He thanks you in a whisper, then throws up on your shoe. You don't complain. That's the best outcome you've had today. By midday, you've seen 15 houses, 10 corpses, 4 people in denial, and 1 nobleman who offered you money to pretend he wasn't infected. You accepted the coin and wrote, "spiritually compromised" on his scroll. Back at your quarters, you strip off the mask with the solemnity of a man peeling off his soul. Your face is soaked. Your hands tremble. Your eyes sting. The stick has developed a crack. You consider naming it. You pour yourself a small cup of brandy. You down it. Then another. Then a third. You light a candle. You try not to think about the child, or the woman, or the ones you couldn't help. You try not to think about tomorrow. Because tomorrow you'll suit up again. You'll walk into more houses. You'll see more faces. Some pleading, some still, some gone already. And you'll keep poking with your stick, nodding like you know what you're doing. Because in plague times, the difference between doctor and actor is mostly costume. And your costume is terrible. Morning number 2, and the mask still smells like funeral soup. You stuff fresh herbs into the beak, rosemary, thyme, and a hint of desperate optimism. It doesn't help. Nothing helps. The smell of yesterday's tragedies lingers in the leather like memories you can't quite bleach away. You take a sip of brandy, not as an indulgence but as armor. Then you grab your stick, open the door, and step into the fog. The city is quieter today. That's not a good sign. It means fewer coughs, fewer cries, fewer people left to make sound at all. Your first call is to a merchant's house. You recognize the door. You visited last week for an infected apprentice. You remember the boy. Bright eyes, swollen neck. You remember the mother weeping. You told her to burn rosemary and open the windows. You don't know if it helped. You never do. You knock. No answer. You push the door open. Inside, the smell greets you first. Sour, heavy, ancient. Like grief fermented. You see the boy in the corner, motionless, jaw open, as if mid-conversation with death. The mother sits in a chair. She's staring at the wall. She doesn't blink. You announce yourself. She turns slowly. Her lips move, but no sound comes out. She looks through you, not at you. Her hands are still. She's done crying. There are no tears left. You record the deaths in your book. No ceremony. Just ink on parchment. You hesitate for a moment, then gently close the boy's eyes. The mask creaks as you bow your head. Outside, the sky is grey. The air is damp and thick with incense and dread. Your second stop is worse. It's a boarding house near the docks. Someone reported groans from a sealed room. You arrive to find the owner outside, wringing his hands. "I can't go in," he says. "They're cursed." Cursed is local shorthand for unconscious and contagious. You nod and push open the warped door with your stick. Inside, 4 bodies, 1 groaning, 3 very much not. The groaning man is tied to the bed. His wrists are raw from struggling. His face is red and bubbling. His eyes flutter. You approach slowly, stepping over another man's leg. You prod the survivor with the stick. He's burning, not metaphorically. His skin radiates heat. You pour water from your pouch into his mouth. He sputters, then grabs your arm. You flinch, not from fear, but from surprise. He whispers, "Tell my brother. Tell him I didn't steal it." You nod, though you don't know who the brother is. You pat his head. You don't know why. It feels human. You step outside and shake your head at the landlord. Burn the bedding, say a prayer, stay outside. He nods like you've just delivered the 10 Commandments. You move on. The next few houses are empty. Not clean, just empty. Tables set for meals that were never eaten. Beds with impressions of bodies long gone. You find a dog, still tied to a post, barking hoarsely at the wind. You untie it and point down the alley. It runs. By late afternoon, your feet ache. The mask has left raw lines on your face. The stick is now your walking cane. You use it more to steady yourself than to poke corpses. You stop by the apothecary. He's one of the few left who talks to you like a person. Need more herbs? He asks. Number need fewer bodies? He gives you a sympathetic smile and hands you a small jar. Inside, honey with garlic. Won't help, he says, but it tastes better than despair. You thank him and move on. Your final visit of the day is to the convent. You knock. A nun opens the door. Her habit is stained. Her eyes are red. 3 gone today, she says. 2 more sick. You follow her down the hall where the walls are lined with makeshift beds. Most of them are empty. The air smells of lavender, lemon, and resignation. One of the sisters grips your gloved hand. Will we all die? She asks. You pause. The real answer is probably, but you say, not today. She nods. She believes you, or pretends to. Either way, you leave her with a smile. On your walk home, the sun begins to set. The streets are quieter still. Even the rats seem exhausted. You remove your mask. The air feels wet and sharp without the filter of herbs and leather. You cough once, just a tickle. You tell yourself it's dust. At home, you wash your hands in cold water. You scrub until your skin burns. You pour wine into your cracked cup and sit by the window. You look out at the street and count how many lamps are still lit. Not many. You sip. You think of the boy, the man tied to the bed, the nun, the dog. You think of the stick propped against the wall. You think about how many more names you'll have to write tomorrow. You wonder if anyone will be left to write yours. And still somehow you sleep. Because you must. Because in this city, you are not just a surgeon anymore. You are memory. You are ritual. You are the mask. And you've got another day off coming soon. The next plague will see to that. Your break from plague duty is over. Congratulations. You're going to war. Not as a soldier. Oh no, you're far too squishy and nearsighted for that. You're here as a surgeon. Field surgeon. Which is Latin for guy who cuts limbs off while dodging cannonballs. Your orders come by horse. The rider looks pale. Not scared. Just disgusted. He hands you the summons and immediately rides off, presumably to vomit somewhere scenic. You pack lightly. Saw, knife, bottle of whiskey, second bottle of whiskey, a rag soaked in vinegar, your apron. You consider bringing your lucky spoon, but remember it snapped last week during an enthusiastic tooth extraction. R.I.P. The battlefield is a 3-day ride away. You spend most of it silently judging the quality of roadside ulcers and making bets with yourself about which leg wounds are faking it for sympathy. You lose most of those bets. People will fake anything to avoid being cannon fodder. Smart people. When you arrive, it's sunrise, which is poetic considering the screaming. The field looks like someone tried to bake a meat pie using live ingredients and poor judgment. Smoke hangs over the trenches. Blood already stains the grass. You step off the wagon and into mud that squelches with suspicious enthusiasm. Your surgical tent is a canvas shack tied together with frayed rope and what you hope isn't human hair. Inside, a table, a bucket, 2 assistants who look like they've never seen a spleen in their lives, and a stack of linen strips that will be read before noon. The first patient arrives without fanfare. He's got a musket ball lodged in his thigh and a look that says he regrets enlisting, being born, and waking up this morning. You smile. You nod. You uncork the whiskey. Drink, you say. He gulps. You set the bottle down and grab your saw. There's no time for delicate removals. There's barely time for a hello. It's saw or die. You choose saw. Your assistants hold the man down. He does not scream. At first, that changes when you hit bone. That scream could crack glass. You try to hum. Something soothing. It turns into something between a chant and a panic attack. You finish. You cauterize the stump with a red-hot iron. You nearly gag. You wrap the wound. You move on. Next, a boy, no older than 16, with shrapnel in his ribs and hope in his eyes. You hate when they still have hope. That makes it worse. You cut. You stitch. You fail. He dies mid-sentence. Probably something about his mother. You wipe your hands on your apron. The stain joins its cousins. Next, a man with half a face. You don't ask what happened. You clean the wounds. You wrap the head. You lie and say he looks dashing. He laughs through cracked teeth. You're both pretending now. Outside, cannons roar. Horses scream. You hate when horses scream. Something about it feels more honest than humans, as if they understand what's happening on a primal level and are furious no one stopped it. By noon, you've performed 7 amputations. You've vomited twice, once discreetly behind the tent, once not so discreetly onto your own boot. That boot is now retired. You wear a sock and accept the squish. Your assistants are twitching. One asks, "Do we ever get used to this?" You look at him. "No," you say. Then you hand him the whiskey. Afternoon brings worse cases. A man with a crushed pelvis who begs you to kill him. A lieutenant who insists he can keep his arm if you just pull harder. A drummer boy who took a stray bullet through the lung. You hold his hand while he drowns in his own blood. It takes 12 minutes. You count each one. By sunset, your hands shake. Your sleeves are stiff. You smell like copper and terror. You sit on a crate and try to remember what sleep felt like. A general visits. He commends your efficiency. You stare at him until he leaves. You don't remember blinking. As darkness falls, the groaning intensifies. The tent fills with moans, gasps, prayers in half a dozen dialects. You light a lamp. You keep working. Your soul, long gone, sends a postcard from somewhere tropical. It says, "Don't come back." You stitch a man's belly shut. He keeps asking if he'll see his wife again. You say yes because it's faster than explaining what septic shock is. Your apron tears. You use someone's coat. You've stopped caring. By midnight, you collapse next to the table. Not in a bed, just on the dirt. Your assistant throws a blanket over you. You're asleep before it hits your chest. Dreams, you don't get dreams anymore. You get flashbacks. Tomorrow, they'll bring in more wagons. Tomorrow, you'll do this again. Because on the battlefield, you don't heal. You manage. And if you're lucky, they bleed out before you start sawing. Dawn breaks like a slap to the face. You wake to the sound of someone screaming. Not just pain screaming, but that particular pitch that suggests a man has seen his own insides and wasn't emotionally prepared. You sit up, realize your back has fused with the mud, and peel yourself upright like a sad lasagna. Your breath fogs in the cold. Your hands are stained from yesterday, red to the wrists, cracked at the knuckles, and twitching like they've developed opinions of their own. You splash water on your face. It smells faintly of iron and regret. No time for breakfast. No one here eats. They chew biscuits and lie about morale. Today's battlefield looks no better than yesterday's. The trenches are filling with water, rats are getting bold, and someone has stapled a motivational slogan to the side of your tent. Bleed less. Win more. You suspect the quartermaster is trying stand-up comedy. The line of patients begins before you can blink. The first is a man cradling his own fingers in a cloth like they're delicate antiques. He asks you if you can reattach them. You nod, mostly out of habit. You try. You stitch and align. It's beautiful work, really. Shame about the gangrene. Next up is a cavalryman who caught a cannonball in the leg. Not directly, that would have solved the problem, but close enough that his femur looks like firewood. You amputate. You've done so many. Your hands move automatically. Cut, saw, scream, cauterize, wrap. It's almost a dance now. A bloody, bone-sawing waltz choreographed by Satan. A nobleman limps in mid-morning. He insists on skipping the line, says his rank demands it. You tell him the man behind him is missing most of his face and might also have feelings about that. They argue. You pretend not to hear and continue digging shrapnel out of someone's shoulder with a spoon. Yes, a spoon. By midday, you've lost count of how many limbs you've removed. You hum a lullaby under your breath as you clean the table. The melody doesn't help anyone, but it keeps you from screaming. Barely. A new batch of stretchers arrives. They're screaming before they reach the tent. One man has no legs and still manages to thrash like he's trying to sprint out of his own skin. You bind the stumps, ignore the bile, and hope he passes out. He doesn't. He watches you the whole time. You try to be gentle. You fail. He thanks you anyway. The general surgeon comes to visit. He looks immaculate. His gloves are white. His coat is pressed. You resist the urge to throw a severed toe at him. He asks how things are going. You hand him a sponge and tell him to find out. He leaves quickly. You feel better for 6 whole seconds. Outside, cannon fire continues like an aggressive drummer with a drinking problem. One blast is so close it knocks over your instrument table. You lose your last good scalpel. You use a pocket knife instead. It's not ideal, but neither is anything else. By afternoon, your assistants are starting to fray. One mutters to himself constantly. The other keeps accidentally calling you mum. You don't correct him. You just hand him another bloody rag and pat his shoulder like you're both pretending this is normal. You treat a drummer boy, no older than 10, who has a bayonet wound through the abdomen. His voice cracks when he tells you his name. You hold his hand while you sew. You tell him stories about faraway cities you've never seen. He dies before you finish the last stitch. You cover him with your own coat. You forget to eat again. There's a biscuit in your pocket. It's probably from last week. You consider it. You don't. Twilight descends and brings with it a new kind of silence, the heavy, haunted kind. There's a lull in the fighting, not peace, just the eye of the storm. You sit on a crate, staring at your hands, which don't seem to belong to you anymore. They're tools now, blunt ones, efficient, detached. A soldier approaches, walking stiffly. You prepare to receive another bleeding mess. Instead, he hands you a letter. From your mentor. It's short. You're doing well. They say you work fast. Fast is good. They don't need heroes. They need hands. You fold the letter and tuck it into your apron. Another cannon blast. You sigh, stand, and stretch your back until it pops. Your knees sound like firewood in a fireplace. More patients arrive, more blood, more choices between bad and worse. You whisper to your assistant, "Let's not kill anyone tonight." He nods. You both know that's optimistic. By midnight, the air is thick with smoke and sweat and something else, something ancient, fear, maybe, or futility. You stitch a man's chest closed and wonder what part of your humanity leaked out through the hole in his lung. Eventually, your lamp flickers. You lie down on the ground again, curl into your coat, and drift off listening to the moans of the wounded and the soft, wet shuffle of rats nearby. Tomorrow, you'll do this again, because you are a 17th century surgeon, and hell doesn't clock out. You sit in a dark, oak-panelled lecture hall that smells like pipe smoke, wet wool, and academic arrogance. You were promised an educational advancement, a chance to learn from the best minds in medicine. What you got was an elderly man in a powdered wig scribbling diagrams of spleens on a blackboard while muttering Latin phrases you're 73% sure are made up. The professor clears his throat dramatically. He taps the board with a stick like he's about to deliver divine wisdom. Instead, he announces, "The spleen, as we know, governs black bile, and black bile governs melancholy. Thus, to cure sadness, amputate the melancholy." You stare. No one laughs. Because he's serious. He's absolutely serious. Beside you, a young apprentice diligently writes it down. You peek at his notes. He's drawn a cartoon spleen with a frowny face and tiny legs. You nod. That's the smartest thing you've seen today. The lecture continues. Today's topic, the healing properties of leech placement in the moral regions. You don't even know what that means. Apparently, if you have lustful thoughts, the cure is applying 3 leeches to your inner thigh. If you're greedy, slap one behind your ear. If you're slothful, the buttocks. Always the buttocks. You begin to suspect this is less about medicine and more about personal kinks. The professor produces a dog from beneath the lectern. A healthy, tail-wagging spaniel, completely unaware that its day is about to go catastrophically sideways. He declares, "We shall now demonstrate the efficacy of full-body humoral correction." Translation: he's going to bleed the poor beast dry in the name of science. A basin is placed beneath the dog. A small incision is made. The blood flows. The tail wags a little less. The professor smiles like he's proving the earth rotates around his ego. Minutes pass. The dog slumps. Someone gasps. You grip your stool. The dog dies. The professor nods with satisfaction and says, "You see? All humours, fully expelled. A perfect example." You look around. No one claps, but no one protests either. You begin questioning not just the lecture, but the entire century you were born into. You shuffle out at the end of the session, past a sign that reads, "Tomorrow, lobotomy demonstration, weather permitting." Outside you find a bench and sit in silence. Your brain feels like it's leaking. A passing student offers you a leech for clarity. You decline, politely, and also with a strong urge to scream. You try to recall what you actually learned today. If someone sneezes, it's a sign of spiritual weakness. The gallbladder controls wrath. Toenail fungus is caused by impure thoughts about cheese. You've gained zero useful surgical knowledge, but you have gained a creeping existential dread and an irrational fear of spaniels. Later that afternoon, you're invited to tea with one of the lecturers. You attend out of obligation, and maybe curiosity. His home is filled with books, strange jars, and a skeleton wearing a powdered wig. He serves tea with a splash of vinegar for digestion, and then casually suggests trepanning as a cure for migraines. Trepanning, the practice of drilling holes in skulls to let the demons out. You ask if he's ever tried it. "Once," he replies, "on myself. I believe it enhanced my creativity." You finish your tea very quickly and make an excuse about needing to wash your leeches. The following day, another seminar. The topic, medical ethics. This one's held in the local tavern. It consists entirely of a man in robes yelling that washing hands is effeminate. He gets applause. You stare into your mug of ale, wondering if you're dreaming. You pinch yourself. You're not. Back at the dormitory, your fellow apprentices share notes from the day. One claims the appendix is where sin is stored. Another believes left-handed patients require clockwise incisions only. A third is building his own cauterizing iron and has branded his name into a pig for practice. You smile politely, then you go outside and scream into the fog for several minutes. In your bunk that night, you draft a letter to your mentor. It reads, "Dear Master, I am learning many things, some useful, most not. Please send real books, or strong wine, or a time machine." You burn the letter. There's no point. The truth is, you've learned something far more valuable than any lecture could teach. Everyone here is faking it. Everyone, including the professors. Especially the professors. You lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how many lives are being ruined by this nonsense. You vow to do better. You vow to think. And you vow, above all, never to apply leeches to a buttock in the name of moral purity. Eventually, you fall asleep. Tomorrow's lecture is titled, "The Benefits of Garlic in Eye Surgery." You consider skipping. You won't. You're a 17th century surgeon. And even bad knowledge is all the knowledge you've got. You begin the next day with a renewed sense of dread, fueled by cold porridge and a single sip of ale that tastes faintly of socks. Today's lecture promises something called experimental surgery. You arrive early, praying, in vain, for something remotely resembling logic. The lecture hall is packed. Eager apprentices, washed and unwashed alike, lean forward in anticipation. On the table before the lecturer lies a cadaver, mostly cadaver. You're fairly certain it twitched when no one was looking. The professor appears in a plume of chalk dust, wearing robes so stained they might be considered a historical document. He clears his throat and begins, "Today we explore the cutting edge of surgical philosophy, literally, observe." He plunges a knife into the cadaver's abdomen and begins rearranging organs like he's searching for lost keys. You look away just as he pulls something out and declares, "Behold the pancreas." It is, in fact, the bladder. Someone applauds, someone faints. You remain frozen, mentally reciting prayers you haven't believed in since the last time someone suggested mercury as a cure for sadness. The professor proceeds to insert a metal rod into the cadaver's nose, all the way to what he calls the seat of dreams. You want to ask questions, but all your questions are just versions of why. You leave the hall lightheaded, trailing the scent of embalming fluid and disappointment. Your fellow apprentices seem unfazed. One is sketching the entire lecture in vivid detail with artistic liberties, including a top hat on the pancreas. You don't correct him. You walk to the local apothecary, hoping to find someone sane. Instead, you find a man offering tinctures made from powdered mummy, genuine Egyptian, he insists. You ask what it cures. He says, fear of mortality. You don't buy any, but you do ask if he sells whiskey by the bottle. That night, you review your notes. The gallbladder is angry. Garlic is a scalpel substitute. Bloodletting cures arrogance. Skull shape determines profession. You begin to suspect phrenology is just an excuse to poke people's heads. Later, during optional dissection hour, you assist your mentor, who once studied abroad, in a barn. He tells you the French are obsessed with tree panning, the Italians with enemas, and the Germans with screaming. He hands you a rib saw and says, "Make me proud, or at least don't vomit directly on the specimen." You do both. Barely. Halfway through the procedure, he waxes poetic about how surgery is a divine art form. The body, he says, is like a church, and I am its renovation committee. You think that metaphor fell down the stairs and hit its head, but he's your superior, and he's holding the saw, so you smile. After class, you're invited to an informal discussion group. Informal, in this case, means 7 men shouting about which organ houses the soul. The liver is a strong contender. One apprentice believes it's the spleen. Another suggests the elbow. You leave when someone starts drawing religious diagrams on a loaf of bread. On your walk home, you're accosted by a travelling healer offering cures for melancholy, madness, and freckles. His remedies include fermented cabbage, vinegar baths, and strong belief in invisible toads. He has testimonials, signed in crayon. You buy the vinegar, just in case. Back at your quarters, your roommate is bleeding a chicken. For practice, you try not to watch. He asks you how the lecture went. You reply, "Enlightening. I now know how not to perform 7 different surgeries." He nods solemnly and offers you a cup of boiled bark. For clarity, you lie awake that night, cataloguing the horrors of the day. A cadaver's bladder was misidentified as hope. A professor drilled a hole in a coconut to explain cranial pressure. A fellow apprentice thought a hernia was just an angry lump. And worst of all, you're starting to accept this as normal. You stare at the ceiling beams, counting spiders and regrets. Your pillow is damp, possibly with tears, possibly with some kind of pre-antibiotic fungus. You no longer care. You think about the dog, the one from the earlier demonstration. You wonder if it had dreams, if it ever dug a hole just for fun, if it knew in those final moments that medicine was just a fancy word for guessing with confidence. You whisper an apology to the universe and promise yourself, if you ever survive long enough to teach others, you'll at least start with the truth, that the body is terrifying, that we know nothing, and that leeches, despite the hype, are not tiny miracles, just tiny vampires with good marketing. You drift off to sleep as the candle gutters out beside you. Tomorrow, you'll attend a workshop titled Curing Hysteria with Goat Hair and Gentle Shouting. You can't wait. City life. The smell of horse dung, open sewers, and someone shouting about turnip theft in the distance. You're back from the battlefield and it's good to be home, by which we mean the part of town where your neighbours are mostly alive and your shoes haven't yet dissolved in puddles of unknown origin. You step into your rented surgical chamber. It's generously described as a clinic. Though the ceiling leaks, the window won't open or close, and your operating table is also your dinner table. A rat greets you from the supply shelf. You name him Thomas and ask him to guard the leeches. Your first patient arrives before you can hang up your blood-stained apron. He's got pustules, a limp, and a smell that declares war on your nose. He hands you a crumpled note from his last doctor. It reads simply, "Good luck." You smile professionally, offer him a seat, bucket, and ask the most important question of any consultation. Have you recently handled any goats, whores, or mystery meats? He shrugs. Maybe. Textbook case. You reach for your syphilis kit, which consists of a pewter spoon, a jar of mercury ointment, and a prayer that rhymes. He winces as you slather the paste onto his sores. Will it help? He asks. You pause. Yes, you lie. But also, no. Mercury does one of two things: slowly poison the disease or slowly poison the patient. It's really just a matter of which gets tired first. You send him off with a grimace and a caution to avoid singing loudly in the rain, just in case the devil hears. Next patient. A woman whose arm is the colour of betrayal and twice the size it should be. She says it started with a splinter, and now she can't feel her fingers. You nod thoughtfully while mentally composing her eulogy. You lance the swelling with a knife that was last cleaned during the reign of Charles I. Pus erupts like it's trying to audition for the theatre. Your assistant gags into his sleeve. You remain stoic. This isn't even the worst-smelling thing you've dealt with today. That would be your own boots. You collect a sample in a chipped glass vial and label it Specimen Number 7, possibly sentient. You'll analyse it later. Maybe. You dip your hands in vinegar and pretend it's sterilisation. Your mentor would be proud, mostly because he believed vinegar could cure everything from gout to ghosts. He once tried to exorcise a haunted hip. You charge the woman £0.50 and offer a bonus leech for luck. She declines. You throw it in for free. Outside, a mob gathers around a street preacher yelling about divine punishment and corrupted fluids. You smile. Business is booming. You take a break to eat something resembling bread. It crumbles like old plaster and tastes worse. You wash it down with warm ale that has a twig floating in it. You pretend it's flavouring. Back inside, another patient is waiting. He's red-eyed, sweaty, and insists he's being chased by invisible toads. Diagnosis: advanced mercury treatment. Side effects include insanity, tremors, and spontaneous poetry. You offer him a tonic of opium and molasses. He recites a limerick and falls asleep on your foot. You consider leaving him there for warmth. In the evening, a nobleman's servant arrives in a panic. My master has boils in places that shall not be named. Too late, you reply, following the man into a carriage that smells like fear and lavender. At the manor, you find the nobleman in bed, surrounded by candles and paranoia. His wife watches from the doorway, fanning herself and mouthing, "Don't mention the maid." You examine the boils. They're angry, possibly Catholic. You nod wisely, prescribe a mercury steam bath, and suggest celibacy. He laughs. His wife does not. Back at your clinic, you scrape pus off your apron and wonder if you've ever been kissed without gloves on. You doubt it. You write in your medical journal. June 14th, 1664, treated 7 boils, 3 lunatics, 2 liars, and 1 poet. Lost a leech. Suspect Thomas. Before sleep, you wash your hands in stale gin and mumble a blessing to Saint Apollonia, patron of pus and patience, probably. You lie awake on your straw mattress, listening to the city cough. Your own skin itches. You've developed a rash in the shape of a fleur-de-lis. Could be fleas, could be destiny. Either way, you're not paid enough. You wake up scratching. It's not a metaphor. There's something living in your hair, possibly several somethings. You make a mental note to boil your pillow again, assuming you can find it. It might have crawled away in protest. Today's to-do list is pinned to the wall with a used lancet. It reads, check boils, apply mercury, scream internally, repeat. You step outside for air, immediately regret it. The Thames smells like fermented socks and despair. A man shouts from a nearby window that his dog has developed religious symptoms. You add him to the afternoon schedule. Back inside, the first patient is already waiting. She's 8 months pregnant, covered in hives, and swears she hasn't seen a doctor since the comet passed overhead. You mean the comet last year? You ask. No, she says. The one before that. You attempt a polite smile, but your mouth is too dry and your lips are crusty with dried herbal balm. You reach for a cracked pewter mirror to check yourself. Mistake. You look like a haunted radish. You press 2 fingers to her wrist, feeling her pulse like a real physician might. It's there. It's panicked. So are you. You recommend rest, water, and praying to at least 3 different saints. She nods, thanks you, and sneezes in your face. You mentally cross out "not ill yet" from your self-assessment. The next man limps in like he's dragging invisible luggage. "I got the king's boil," he announces proudly. "That's not a real thing," you reply. "It's on the royal buttock," he insists. You ask him to drop his trousers. He does. You instantly regret all your life choices. You peer at the mass of inflamed flesh and mutter a prayer to St. Ignatius, the unofficial patron saint of people who didn't sign up for this. You slice into it with your trusted pus dagger. A geyser erupts. Your boots are now waterproofed in human misery. You pack the wound with stale honey and whisper, "Be gone, demon," because frankly, nothing else has worked this week. After a quick swig of gin, medicinal, you prepare to meet your least favourite patient. Old Widow Barley. She shows up daily. She has no symptoms. She just enjoys the bleeding. "I have melancholy in my liver," she declares. "That's not how livers work." Then in my feet. You sigh, pour a few ounces of blood into a bowl, and ask if she's felt lighter spiritually. "Oh yes," she says, swaying, like a blessed goose. You apply a leech to each ankle as a reward. In the afternoon, a printer arrives with a mangled hand. The press caught 3 fingers. You study the mess and declare, "You won't be pointing at anyone for a while." He doesn't laugh. You try again. "You'll need a new signature move?" Still nothing. You sigh, wrap the hand in vinegar-soaked linen, and hope for divine glue. Outside, a parade of plague orphans throws cabbage at a constable. Inside, your assistant trips over a chamber pot and vomits into a bucket. You tell him it's part of the training. He does not appreciate this. Later, a travelling French physician visits your shop, offering to trade leech breeding tips for some mercury ointment. He wears a velvet coat and smells like rosemary and lies. Still, he has fascinating opinions on pus texture and the spiritual resonance of vomit. You swap a jar of ointment for his recipe for boiled bat bile, which he insists cures love and arthritis. You don't believe him, but you write it down anyway. Near sundown, a messenger arrives with urgent news. The mayor's nephew has caught something alarming in the lower regions. You grab your instruments, your best hat, and an extra candle for ambiance, and head off to the manor. The manor is huge, the carpet too soft, the air suspiciously lemon-scented. The patient whimpers behind a curtain while the mayor explains in hushed tones that he may have visited a brothel run by musical nuns. You nod solemnly and prepare the mercury. The patient screams. You offer him a wooden spoon to bite. He declines. You shove it in anyway. Back at the clinic, you collapse into your chair and light a tallow candle. Its smell reminds you of goats and funerals. You open your medical ledger to document the day. June 15th. 15 patients, 1 possessed boil, 3 leech requests, and 1 minor amputation with spoon due to missing saw. Burned robe, lost third toenail, acquired French bat recipe, status concerned. You begin to doze, only to be woken by Thomas the rat, who's chewing on your lancet pouch again. You shoo him away, pour yourself the last of the gin, and stare into the middle distance. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Maybe pus will stop being your primary language, but probably not. Your nickname spreads faster than cholera. The Butcher of Bath. At first, it was an insult whispered behind your back by rival surgeons and overly dramatic nuns. Then a patient said it with awe. Then someone had it carved into a walking stick. Now it's how your mail is addressed. You didn't ask for the title, but you did earn it. 3 limbs, 1 patient, under 2 minutes. You didn't plan it that way, but the man was already half unattached when he arrived. You just made it official. The crowd cheered. There was a crowd because, of course, this was performed in the public market next to the goose vendor, with a lute player improvising a song about femurs. And yet people keep coming. The sick, the desperate, the thrill-seekers. Even a local nobleman sent his manservant to observe you work for educational purposes. You told him to hold the basin and not ask questions. He fainted halfway through a shoulder job and hasn't been seen since. Your saw has become an extension of your arm. The handle is worn smooth by your grip. You've named it Mercy, not because it is gentle, but because mercy is all anyone can hope for once you begin. Today's lineup includes 2 gangrenous legs, 1 shattered forearm, and a child with something suspiciously blue growing on his toe. You take a breath and begin. Patient 1 is a stable boy who lost a fight with a spooked horse. His leg is black to the knee and smells like betrayal. You offer him a strip of leather to bite and ask his friends to hold him down. He says, "I don't want to die." You pat his head. That's the spirit. You start sawing. The bone crunches like burnt toast. The crowd gasps. A nearby dog vomits from the smell. You finish in 41 seconds. The crowd cheers. The boy passes out. You are already rinsing your hands in a bucket of rosewater and something you think might be gin. Next up, a chimney sweep with a mangled arm. He says, "I can still feel my fingers." You reply, "Not for long." Your assistant holds the arm steady as you position mercy. The saw bites deep. The boy screams something foul about your ancestry. You reply with a poem about shoulder sockets. It takes 50 seconds. You offer him a boiled sweet. He bites your glove. Patient 3 is more of a puzzle, a butcher's apprentice with a toe that's changed colour 3 times this week. You prod it with your finger. It wiggles menacingly. You consult your medical book, then set the book on fire for safety. "Best to take the whole foot," you declare. He stares at you in terror. "Why?" "Because toes travel in packs." You saw swiftly. The foot hits the tray with a slap. Your assistant turns green. You hum a merry tune about hygiene as you wrap the stump in vinegar-soaked bandages. He tries to tip you with a hunk of cheese. You accept. You take a short break to wash your hands in the rain barrel outside, which now contains more blood than water. A group of children gathers around to ask if you'll be on stage at the fair next month. You tell them maybe. You're negotiating a contract for the fastest amputation in Wessex with a travelling circus. Back inside, your apprentice asks, "Master, do you ever feel strange?" You raise an eyebrow. "In what way?" He looks at your hands, shaky, twitching, still stained at the knuckles. "Haunted." You laugh. "No, boy. Haunted is when the limb still twitches after you remove it." He doesn't laugh. You don't either. Later that evening, you sit in your quarters and clean your tools. Each one has a story. The bone saw that snapped during a rainstorm. The curved knife you once used to remove a cannonball from a Frenchman's thigh. The clamp that's more rust than metal. You sip lukewarm wine and stare at your own hands. They don't feel like yours anymore. They feel ceremonial, as if they belong to some butcher priest from a forgotten age, performing rituals on the flesh. There's a knock. A woman in a bonnet enters, dragging a child with a swollen leg. "Please," she says. "They say you're the fastest." You smile gently and nod. "Aye, fastest in Bath." She wipes a tear. "Will it hurt?" "Only at first," you lie. You light the lantern, wash your hands again, and pick up mercy. The ritual begins anew. There's something obscene about becoming good at amputation. Not just capable, good, efficient, precise, respected even. You've become the talk of 3 towns and a cautionary tale in 2 others. Local mothers threaten unruly children with a trip to your surgery. A bishop recently called your methods a necessary blasphemy. You took that as a compliment. You now move like a craftsman at a market stall. One whose craft just happens to involve removing limbs. Your surgical apron looks like a murder confession, and your boots make a squelch sound you try not to think about. The floor of your workspace permanently smells like vinegar and trauma, and yet the line outside never ends. Today's first patient is a drunk cooper who fell into his own barrel forge. His hand looks like someone tried to roast it over a candle, then gave up halfway. He's weeping, half from pain and half from the prospect of losing his drinking hand. "You'll be all right," you tell him, positioning your assistant to steady the elbow. "You've still got one to raise a pint with." He laughs through snot and fear. "Make it quick." You do. The hand comes off like an overripe fruit, with only a brief crunch of bone and some unfortunate spraying. The crowd applauds. Someone throws a turnip in admiration. You've started taking time. Not because you're getting worse, but because you've realized something sinister. Speed terrifies people more than blood. They expect the screaming. They don't expect efficiency. You've made amputation look casual. That's what unsettles them. You've begun developing a flair for showmanship. Your assistant now announces your name before each procedure. Make way for the butcher of Bath. You bow. You twirl your saw. You produce a cloth and wipe your brow like an actor on the West End. The patients don't find this comforting, but the onlookers love it. Second patient, a constable's wife, whose foot has turned purple and ballooned to twice its size. She insists on keeping her bonnet on during the procedure. You oblige. She screams so fiercely during the sawing that your ears ring for hours. The bonnet remains pristine. The foot, meanwhile, is now part of your anatomical curiosities jar collection. You've developed an entire shelf of body bits preserved in brandy. It's educational, you claim. Really, it's because you no longer trust medical textbooks. Your collection includes 3 toes, a shriveled ear, and something that might be a spleen but also might be an apricot. Third patient, a travelling actor with a gangrenous thigh and an overactive imagination. He insists on delivering a monologue while you work. You saw through his leg while he recites lines from Hamlet. He faints halfway through, to be or not to be. You finish the job to silence and a round of modest applause. The world around you starts to blur. Everything smells like antiseptic and meat. You hear phantom sawing noises even when asleep. Sometimes, when you close your eyes, you still see splinters of bone flying like confetti. Your assistant catches you humming a jaunty tune while cleaning your blade. You didn't realize you were humming. "You all right, master?" he asks. You look up, hands trembling. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" He doesn't answer, but he begins leaving the room more often. You think he's writing letters, probably to warn someone. You don't blame him. You start experimenting with technique, angling the saw for cleaner cuts, timing your movements with a metronome borrowed from a church organist. You keep a log of your average removal times. You're down to 35 seconds for a below-the-knee leg on a cooperative patient. You feel pride, then shame, then more pride. You start wondering if your tools deserve names. Mercy was just the start. The curved hook, call it kindness. The clamps, judgment. The little mallet for cracking bone alignment, grace. You keep a journal. It reads like a liturgy from a bloody religion. You're summoned by a duke whose nephew lost 3 fingers in a hunting accident. The duke demands the hand be saved. You explain that it's necrotic. He demands again. You try leeches. Nothing. Eventually, you remove the hand and blame it on a spontaneous humoral disintegration. The duke is displeased. He pays you in silence and sends you away without wine. On the road back to town, you find yourself stopping to stare at your own hands. They no longer feel like yours. They feel like tools, or weapons, or both. You reach your door and pause. For the first time in weeks, you hesitate. Inside is your table, your apron, your blades. A patient waits moaning, a boy with a crushed foot from a runaway cart. You step in, hands steady despite everything, and say, "Well now, let's take a look." You pick up Mercy and begin to hum. The butcher of Bath lives on. But somewhere, deep inside the rhythm of saw against flesh, a question has started to echo. What happens when the cutting stops? You knew this day would come. You've hacked, sawed, and bled your way through towns, hamlets, and battlefields. You've operated drunk, in the rain, during solar eclipses and peasant riots. But today, you're facing your greatest fear. Court. Not the royal kind, the legal kind. The kind with powdered wigs and snickering scribes. The kind where your title, surgeon, becomes a punchline whispered behind parchment. It all started with a nobleman's son. Of course it did. He arrived unconscious, bleeding from a fencing accident that, according to his friends, involved more wine than swordplay. His chest was opened up like a butchered hog. You saw ribs. You saw lungs. You saw a job that needed doing. So you did what you always do. Panic slightly, slap on some moss, and get to work. Your notes, hastily scrawled in blood and soot, claim you repositioned the pleural cavity using olive oil, thyme, and conviction. You stitched him shut with pig gut and faith, and for a brief, shining moment, it looked like it might work. Then he woke up and screamed. Not from the pain. That was expected. No, he screamed because you had left a small wooden spoon inside his chest. You don't even remember using a spoon. You still insist it wasn't yours. Regardless, the son recovered, but slowly, too slowly, and with a newfound tendency to whistle when he breathed. His father, a count with a wig taller than your sense of self-worth, demanded answers. You gave them, he didn't like them. Now you're in court. The courtroom is packed, not because of the case, but because someone posted a sign reading, "Mad Sawbones to defend his witchcraft." Half the town showed up hoping you'll curse the judge. The other half brought snacks. You sit at a table far too polished for your blood-stained coat. Your surgical bag has been placed on display like evidence in a murder trial. The judge eyes your sore with the same expression one might reserve for a rabid badger. He clears his throat. You are accused of malpractice, bodily harm, unauthorized surgery upon noble flesh, and possession of what the bishop has described as heretical salves. How do you plead? You attempt confidence. I followed the teachings of Galen. This, it turns out, was the wrong move. The judge bursts into laughter. The prosecutor chokes on his ink quill. A child in the back yells, "What's a Galen?" Your case is off to a thrilling start. They ask about the herbs you used. You try to explain. Thyme for infection, rose oil for inflammation, and a splash of vinegar for dramatic effect. The judge interrupts. Why in God's name would you stuff thyme into an open chest wound? You panic. For flavour? This is somehow worse. You're asked about your training. You mumble something about apprenticing with a barber who used to sew up piglets. You mention a battlefield, a lecture hall, a suspicious monk who sold you a book titled Wounds and Wonders. The judge narrows his eyes. You have no formal medical degree? You hesitate. Is surviving my own treatment a degree? The courtroom howls. Even the court painter stops mid-sketch to chuckle. Then they bring in the patient. He looks surprisingly well. Pale, yes. Wobbly a bit. But alive. Breathing. Whistling, as expected. They ask him to describe the experience. He says you muttered to yourself, cursed at a candle, and danced slightly when applying stitches. You don't deny any of it. Then he points to the spoon. This, he says, was inside me for 3 days. You nod solemnly. It was sterile. It wasn't. Everyone knows it wasn't. Your assistant, dragged into court as a witness, does his best to help. He says things like, he meant well, and the patient was technically alive when we left. It doesn't help. The judge seems ready to rule, but then something unexpected happens. A former patient stands up, a blacksmith missing 1 foot and half an ear. He speaks. That lunatic saved my life. I had a fever, a rotting leg, and worms in my hair. He cut off the leg and gave me a new one made from driftwood and optimism. A murmur. Then another. A tavern maid who lost 2 fingers to frostbite. A soldier whose nose you reattached with chicken bone. One by one, they rise. A small army of survivors, limping, bandaged, wheezing, but loyal. You smile. Not because you're proud, but because for once, someone's talking about the ones you didn't accidentally maim. The judge sighs. This court recognizes the questionable effectiveness of your methods, and while your surgical approach borders on blasphemy, your survival rate is uncomfortably high. He pauses. You are hereby stripped of your right to practice surgery upon nobles, clergy, or livestock. However, the court will not imprison you, partially because no one wants to be treated by you in prison. A modest cheer. You gather your things. Your dignity, that's long gone. But your saw, still sharp, still ready. As you exit the court, a child runs up. Are you the butcher doctor? You nod. Only if you're not rich. He grins. Can you fix my uncle's hump? You sigh. Lead the way, boy. Let's ruin another miracle. Freedom, as it turns out, is not particularly relaxing. After your court spectacle, you're technically a free man, but now you're infamous. Villagers point at you and whisper. Children chase you with wooden spoons. Somewhere, a local ballad is being written about your spoon incident. And it's not flattering. The chorus includes the line, "He cuts with flair and leaves you bare, beware the doctor of despair." You try to resume your surgical practice under less formal arrangements. You hang a sign that reads, "General Fixer of Limbs and Lesser Dooms." It does not inspire confidence. One man drops off his goat with a cough and refuses to explain whether it's for eating or surgery. You take the job anyway. The goat lives. You lose your lunch. You attempt to regain respect. You offer free consultations at the marketplace. First comes a woman with gout, then a boy with lice, then a man who just wants someone to talk to. You prescribe wine for all three. Only the boy improves. Meanwhile, nobles avoid you like you're made of leprosy and malpractice lawsuits. The Guild of Barber Surgeons issues a formal statement. He may still possess hands, but we question what they're good for. They spell your name wrong. You're not even angry about it. Your apprentice suggests rebranding. What about a new name? He says, chewing on something unidentifiable, like Healing Wizard or the Blade Whisperer. You settle on Doctor. No questions. The new name doesn't help. One patient demands to know what a spiritual extraction is. You tell him it's when the pain leaves through his ears. He leaves with both ears bandaged and refuses to pay. But there are some bright spots. You get letters, actual letters. One from a soldier in Flanders who says the leg you reattached, incorrectly but still, has made him run faster in circles. Another from a nun who thanks you for removing a boil with the mercy of a saint and the reflexes of a pickpocket. You begin to believe, just slightly, that you might not be entirely awful. Then one afternoon you get summoned again, not to a court, worse, to a university, a real one, with books, and people who say things like empirical method and intestinal flora. You walk through stone halls past students with quills and seriousness. You're wearing your best tunic, which means only 2 bloodstains. They don't want to sue you, they want to study you. You are now, horrifyingly, considered a folk practitioner, a subject of academic interest, like a dancing bear or a man who eats rocks. You are asked to speak on a panel. The other panelists have names like Cornelius von Medicus and Lady Artemisia de Pulse. They wear gloves. You wear a smock that smells like vinegar and despair. They ask about your methods. You answer honestly, "I feel for swelling, then I poke it." Gasps. They ask about diagnosis. You say, "If it stinks, I cut it. If it twitches, I pray." A woman faints. You're now considered a radical, not because you're advanced, but because you're terrifying. Still, they write it down. They nod thoughtfully. One man begins sketching your sore. Another offers you money for your blood. You decline, mostly because you're not sure you have much left. That night, you wander into a tavern, not to drink, to think. You sit at a back table, listening to the crackle of the fire and the quiet buzz of patrons not yelling at you for once. Then someone sits beside you. It's the nobleman's son, the one with the spoon. He grins. His breathing still whistles. "You ruined my fencing career," he says. You brace for the punch. Instead, he clinks his mug against yours. "But you saved my life. Or at least, you tried, and you weren't boring." That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to you. He tells you he's now a poet, writes about death, mostly, and surgery. One of his poems is titled "Chest Cavity of Stars." You ask for a copy. He says no. You leave that night without paying for your drink. He covers it. You walk into the fog feeling almost human. Back at home, your assistant is experimenting with heated stones and foot massages. He says it might be the future. You nod. You're proud of the idiot. You hang a new sign outside your shack. "Doctor, no questions and assistant, we try." It's not elegant, but it's honest. Sometimes that's enough, especially when your next patient is a pig named Margaret and the owner just wants someone who cares. You vanish, not with a bang, but with a whimper and a half-healed limp. No farewell banquet, no engraved scalpel, just a slow, uneven shuffle out of town while a neighbour yells, "Don't forget to take your pus bucket." You don't respond, you don't even turn around. You're not sure if your spine still bends that way. You settle in a cottage so far from civilization, even the rats send postcards. The roof leaks, the walls weep. Your only consistent companion is a 3-legged cat you name Contagion. She bites affectionately, and sometimes leaves diseased frogs as gifts. You understand her completely. Your tools, once stained with prestige and whatever that smell was, now gather dust. You arrange them on a wooden shelf like relics. There's the bone saw you nicknamed Whistler, the clamp that never clamped, the leech jar still smelling faintly of regret and pond scum. You sit in silence mostly. Silence and the occasional sound of Contagion vomiting something amphibious behind the stove. There are days when you pace the floorboards, muttering to ghosts. Former patients, former mistakes, former mentors who once told you that bloodletting was divine truth and mercury cured love. You argue with them, loudly. The frogs judge you. But despite the mental erosion and poor insulation, word begins to spread. At first, it's small. A pamphlet, probably printed by some overeducated twit in London, references a peculiar rural surgeon of unorthodox brilliance. You're not named, but the description is suspiciously specific. A man of questionable hygiene, curious method, and terrifying precision. You frame it. Then come the letters. Scholars. Surgeons in training. Even an alchemist from Bavaria who claims to have dreamed of you during a mercury trance. They want to know what you know. How you knew to pack wounds with mould. How you suspected boiling instruments might help. How you once said, pain is honesty in liquid form. You didn't say that, but you're flattered someone thinks you did. You ignore most of the letters. You burn a few. One you answer by accident because you thought it was from a wine merchant. It wasn't. But now a young physician named Horatio sends you questions weekly and insists on calling you master. You allow it. It feels nice, like recognition, or maybe an early symptom of brain rot. Horatio becomes a pen pal of sorts. He updates you on medical conferences you'd never be invited to. He writes things like, your method of observational incision is now referred to as the contagion principle. You laugh until Contagion hisses at you and knocks over a jar of mystery. You try to write things down, not for glory, for clarity. You make it one paragraph. Then you remember you've never really known what you were doing, only that you did it fast and with commitment. Still, you keep writing. Chapter titles include Amputation, a Dance of Hesitation and Screaming. Leeches, Friends or Parasitic Overlords. That time I sewed a man's ear to his shoulder, and why he was fine with it. You never finish any of them, but the process feels like penance. Then one day, a knock. You freeze. No one knocks. There are no people here. Just moss, wind, and the occasional confused goat. You open the door. It's Horatio. He's real. Younger than expected. Looks healthy. Clean. Like someone who sterilizes things before licking them. He bows slightly and says, I had to see you. You stare. Then say, are you here to rob me or dissect me? He laughs, too earnestly. He spends 3 days in your shack, takes notes, sketches. You tell him everything. How many patients you lost, how many limbs you couldn't save, how many times you almost bit your own tongue off in terror mid-operation. He nods and writes revolutionary intuition in his notebook. You want to correct him, you don't. He leaves you with 2 bottles of wine, a new scalpel, and a promise. Your work matters. You weep loudly. Contagion claws your foot. Over the following months you hear rumours that your name is spoken at universities, that young surgeons argue over whether you were brilliant or insane, that one physician referred to your style as proto-modern, another called it applied madness. A third just screamed and ran from the lecture hall. All acceptable interpretations. You don't return to town. The frogs wouldn't allow it. But you do leave a box on the doorstep one morning. Inside, your tools, your notes, a letter that begins, to whomever finds this, may your hands be steadier than mine. You close the door, light a fire, and watch as the fog rolls in again, thick and uncaring. You do not know if your legacy will be truth or legend, but either way, the screaming has stopped. And for now, that's enough. You start aging like soft cheese in a warm cupboard. Your joints creak louder than your floorboards. Your eyesight blurs around the edges, which is helpful because it means you don't have to fully witness your reflection in the cracked mirror. Your hands, once known for their speed and cruelty, now tremble when lifting a teacup, if you had a teacup, which you don't. You drink out of an old bowl that once held kidneys. Some days you wake up convinced it's 1667. Other days, you forget your own name until Contagion meows it at you. She's still alive somehow. More teeth than fur at this point. You suspect she made a deal with death in exchange for 9 increasingly cursed lives. Your hut decays with you. Moss grows on the ceiling. There's a smell you can't identify and have stopped trying to. You occasionally throw old bandages into the fire, not for heat but to test your immune system. So far it's undefeated or indifferent. The village nearby knows of you. They don't visit, except for when someone gets desperate. One stormy evening, a frantic knock. A boy stands there, soaked and sobbing. He holds out a bundle of cloth, which is leaking red. "Please," he stammers. "The doctor said no, said it was too late." You squint. "So you came to me?" He nods. "They said you're mad, but you saved a man with no stomach." You don't recall doing that. Probably just lost the stomach in a ditch and pretended it was on purpose. You let him in. Inside the cloth, a young girl with a leg nearly torn off. "A cart accident," he says. You see the bone, you see the dirt, you see the future infection preparing its invasion. You sigh, you boil water, you sharpen your saw. The firelight flickers against your shaking hands. You whisper to the girl, "I'm sorry for what I'm about to do, and even sorrier for how I'll do it." The procedure is ugly, primitive. You use every ounce of instinct and half-remembered theory. The boy sobs the whole time. The girl doesn't scream because she's unconscious or already too far gone. You work by habit, muscle memory, half miracles and full guesswork. You close the wound. You pack it with something vaguely sterile, dried moss, wine, and an apology. You collapse onto the floor and mutter, "If she lives, it's divine intervention. If she doesn't, blame gravity." You sleep for 18 hours. Contagion guards the door. When you wake, she's still alive. 3 weeks later, she walks. Limping, yes, but alive. The village is stunned. They start sending more. Children with fevers. Men with burns. A baker who swallowed his own tooth. They come quietly, like pilgrims visiting a haunted shrine. You treat them all. You don't charge them, not because you're noble, but because you don't remember how currency works anymore. Word spreads again. A travelling playwright includes you in a scene, a mad forest surgeon with eyes like burned paper and hands that shake only after the cutting's done. Audiences cheer. A priest protests. Sales double. A French medical journal refers to you as a lost prophet of pre-modern methodology. You don't read French. You assume it's insulting. You're probably right. Back in your hut, Horatio writes. He's now Dr. Horatio. His last letter says, "You inspired a generation of reluctant heroes. Your name is used as both warning and aspiration. Some say you were a monster, others a martyr. I say you were a mirror." You tear up. Not because you're moved, because you tried to eat a candle stub again. Eventually, the village builds you a proper roof, brings you soup, calls you Doc. You don't correct them. One final winter arrives. Contagion curls at your feet. Your body, once so busy destroying other people's pain, now stews in its own. You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that sinks into the marrow. You sit by the fire one last time. You hold your old saw. Rusted. Dull. You whisper to it. "You and I, we did the best we could with the worst we had." You fall asleep in the chair. You don't wake up. They bury you on a hill overlooking the village. Someone carves a headstone that reads, "Here lies the butcher, the madman, the miracle." Below it, someone else carves, "He wasn't that bad." Years pass. Generations shift, the stories grow wilder. They say you invented anesthesia with screaming alone, that you could spot gangrene from 50 paces, that you once amputated a man's leg while juggling leeches and insulting the Pope. None of it's true, and yet somehow all of it is. Your name endures, twisted, exaggerated, sometimes revered, sometimes reviled. A cautionary tale, a folk hero, a punchline in a medical lecture, a whispered prayer during surgery. You are gone. Utterly. But legend is its own form of infection, and yours spreads beautifully.